What's up, y'all? Phil Nash here from Coach's Digest, talking today about what the is non-linear pedagogy. This title actually comes from a conversation I had with a colleague probably about a year ago, which sent me down the kind of motor learning rabbit hole. We were talking about kind of how he views movement skill. And within the Exos training system, movement skill is just simply talking about acceleration, absolute speed, or multi-directional skills. And within that, he was talking about this concept of nonlinear pedagogy. And my response to him was, bro, what the is nonlinear pedagogy? And again, sent me down this rabbit hole of motor learning, kind of changing how I view motor learning and how I design my movement skill sessions and just my sessions with members and athletes in general. So today we're going to talk about the principles of nonlinear pedagogy. We'll compare linear and nonlinear models of coaching. And then finally, we'll practically apply the nonlinear pedagogical approach to performance enhancement. So simply put, how can us as coaches or physical therapists or personal trainers use this model to improve how our members, our clients, our athletes move? So what the heck is nonlinear pedagogy? And when in doubt, you have a question, a great starting point, low key, is just asking ChatGPT. All right. And then going from there, right, to going into the rabbit hole from there. But nonlinear pedagogy is defined as an approach to teaching and learning that emphasizes the use of dynamic and adaptable instructional methods. It is based on the idea that learners are active participants who can discover and develop their skills through self-exploration, problem solving, and self-regulation. A little long-winded, but I like to simplify things. And really, I think we could simplify it as a learner-centric design that recognizes the variable nature of learning and manipulates the environment, the task, and the organism to support motor learning through exploration and problem solving. Now, some of the really big rocks here in this definition of nonlinear pedagogy, the first one being the fact that it's nonlinear, right? So understanding that actual motor learning, right? So if I'm learning a skill, like I'm learning how to squat, I'm learning how to accelerate, I'm learning how to throw a football, right? It's not going to happen in first I learn step one, then I learn step two, then I learn step three, right? This isn't an example like math, right? So thinking back to elementary school, and for some of us, this might be traumatic, like myself, thinking about how poor I was at math as a kid. But, first you learn how to count. Then you learn basic subtraction and addition. Then you learn multiplication tables, right? Then we go and go and go and go. And all of a sudden we're at pre-calc and calculus and things like that, right? When we're learning a skill, we can go from counting to calculus, right? Based on how we're showing up, based on the environment that we're working in. So a nonlinear pedagogical approach really hones in on the variable nature of learning. Another key aspect is this concept of dynamic systems theory, right? So how we move is highly predicated upon the environment, the task, and then us, the organism, right? So it's taking all these things into account and understanding that we can manipulate variables in the environment, the task, and then improve or enhance our abilities as the organism to improve how we ultimately choose to move in a given situation. And then the final piece here that's just super important, has been a huge mindset shift for me as a coach, is now focusing more on allowing my clients, allowing my athletes to explore and solve problems, right? And now I like to think about a technique as just a solution to a problem, right? So think about a barbell back squat, right? I have a bar on my back. It feels heavy. Now the problem is, how can I squat all the way down and stand all the way up in a safe and effective manner, right? And my solution is effectively the technique that I choose to solve that quote unquote problem of performing the lift of the squat, right? That's a simple example. The same idea, throwing a touchdown pass is a problem. How do I get this football to my receiver in the end zone, given the environment of the defense trying to stop that play from happening, right? My solution to that problem is effectively how I throw that football, right? So now we'll talk about it a little more at the end of the presentation, but I'm shifting my mindset more from being a quote unquote hands-on coach and giving the answers to being a little bit more hands-off and trying to encourage my members, my clients, my athletes to explore the movement solution space. And we'll talk about that a little bit further in a second. But real quick, just diving a little bit deeper into dynamic systems theory. And again, it's a theory that how we move is going to be predicated upon the environment, the task, and us as the organism. So the environment can be the physical environment that we're working in. It could be the surface. It could be the players around us. The task is the goal, right? So again, am I trying to squat this bar? am I trying to throw a touchdown pass? And then the organism is what I'm bringing to the table, or what our athletes are bringing to the table. And within Exos, we simply break down the organism into position, pattern, and power, right? So position being the shapes that we can make, pattern being how we coordinate movement between shapes, and then power being our strength qualities. So be it, our max force production, actual quality of power, right? It could be endurance-based qualities as well, but it's what we're bringing to the table from a strength quality standpoint, right? So simply put, if myself as an organism, easy example, I don't have the ankle dorsiflexion to adequately drop my shin and accelerate, right? Whether in any instance, right? Well, if I can improve my ankle mobility and I can prove how I pattern ankle dorsiflexion, well, I've just opened up a whole nother range of movement options for myself, right? So it's not just manipulating the environment and the task, but it's also manipulating the organism to ultimately change how we choose to move, right? This is a little bit of a shift in how we view motor learning, or at least models of motor learning. I think traditionally, models of motor learning have been brain-centric, meaning that we store a motor program in the brain and then pick that program, again, based on the environment and the task. When in reality, it's not necessarily the brain, right? Because our movement happens too quickly, especially in sporting environments, for us to go and pick a program from the brain, right? It's organically coming to light from the environment, the task, and then us as the organism. And then we do have different states called attractor states. And we'll talk about that a little bit later in the presentation when we talk about our intrinsic dynamics that we do get pulled into, right? So think about our gait pattern, right? No one taught us how to walk, but that's an attractor state that we get pulled into because it's effective, right? And it's a pretty deeply ingrained attractor state, right? I don't know many people who start walking and then all of a sudden, I'm walking samesies. I forgot how to walk up a set of stairs because it's a different environment. Now, because that attractor state is so deep, regardless of my environment, I know I'm walking opposite arm, opposite leg, right? And my gait pattern, yes, the distance may change, the frequency may change, yes, but generally speaking, that pattern's pretty ingrained, right? That's going to be how I choose to walk in any environment that I'm in. So let's talk about linear versus nonlinear pedagogical approaches. And our linear, I think of these more as top down, right? So this is our math class example. Right? These are going to be more of a predetermined structure to training, right? So I'm teaching this. Once you get that down, then we go to this. Once you get that down, then we go to this. Once you get that down, then we go to this, right? So it'd be like breaking down a jump shot, right? And we'll get the wrist action. Then we'll start to put it together. And then all of a sudden we're shooting free throws. Then we're shooting a jump shot. Then we're shooting a 3-point shot. Now we're starting to shoot defended shots, right? Now I'm doing catch and shoot, right? And we just build and build and build and build with the idea that learning is a stepwise process, right? So again, progression is going to be uniform and linear. The coach plays the central role in the learning process. So instead of helping them explore, right, or find the solution, or giving them a solution space to work in and explore, I'm giving you the answers, right? I'm saying this is how the movement needs to be done for it to be done correctly. And then our skills are taught in isolation, right? So I'm teaching you how to shoot way outside of what it would look like in an actual game. Now, the difference is nonlinear. I can think about this more as bottoms up. So I'm meeting the learner, I'm meeting the person where they're at, and we're building the learning from there, right? So it's going to be a dynamic and adaptable learning environment based on how my athlete, my client, my team is responding, right? And learners are going to be encouraged to explore the solution space. So again, right, I'm not saying, hey, get this Frisbee and throw it, and you figure out how to throw a Frisbee on your own. No, right? We use our instruction as a tool to put guardrails up, right? So now all of a sudden, now I have the guardrails up on, hey, you can do anything within this range to try to throw the Frisbee as far as you can, right? And now they're exploring that solution space, and I'm encouraging them to feel what works, what doesn't work, right? And instead of giving feedback that is, hey, try this every single time, or think about this every single time, I'm asking more questions. Right? So what did that feel like? What are you going to try to do differently? Right? Making them an active participant in the learning process instead of me being the purveyor of all knowledge and all information. So as a coach, I'm taking that hands-off role, that hands-off guide that facilitates that exploration. And then another major piece here, another major change, skills are going to be integrated and learned in the context of how they might be performed, right? So instead of form shooting in the air, right, we're immediately starting shooting at a basket, right? Instead of throwing a football at a tire, I'm immediately starting throwing a football at a wide receiver who's running, right? Again, starting to ingrain these patterns in the environment that they're going to be performed in, understanding that that environmental information that they're getting is going to be so important, right? That's part of how we decide to move, right? So I want to keep those things coupled at times, knowing that, again, quarterback example, I have that receiver streaking across the field. That how fast he's moving, that's going to dictate the angle, the speed, how much of my legs I get into my throw, right? I want to keep that coupled when I'm learning how to throw a ball. Now, it doesn't always have to be that way, but generally speaking, we want to work towards that, right? And include at least some of that in our practice design at all times. So as a coach, we're always balancing a top-down and a bottoms-up approach at every single level of our program and our practice design, right? And you can think about this from a simple program design standpoint, right? Generally speaking, a top-down approach would be like an annual plan or a macro cycle, right? I have 3 months of training. I'm going foundation, hypertrophy, strength. But we all know as coaches, as physical therapists, as personal trainers, a good plan is a good plan until you get punched in the face, and shit's gonna happen no matter what, whether someone gets hurt, whether someone doesn't like the plan, whether, hey, we actually have enough muscle mass, like let's just go into strength. Hey, you know what, this 4-week foundational phase, you're good to go. Let's go right into hypertrophy, right? We need to have bottoms up strategies as well, right? So from a top down approach, right, for me as a coach, if I'm teaching movement skill, it could be, cool, I want to teach acceleration, right? I want to improve my athlete's ability to accelerate. And I'll use soccer as an example because I work with a ton of club soccer players, but soccer, right? I want to give someone the ability to accelerate within the game. Well, cool. Now I have that as my plan, right? I have my dates of when we start and when we end. And then from a learning standpoint, I'm going to start giving out ideas or implementing things in practice that allow my athletes to explore. Yes, we're still marching and skipping. Yes, we're still doing wall drills, but the rationale behind them changes. Right now, I'm doing drills to provide context for them of how things are supposed to feel and encouraging them to explore how they feel. And that way they can try to recreate that sensation when they're sprinting, right? And then my drills aren't set in stone, right? If it's not working, I'm moving on. If it's working great, maybe we'll stay there for a little bit longer than expected, right? So that's the balance of the top down and bottoms up. And it's the same thing when we're talking about motor learning. And it's also the same thing when we're talking about our program design, right? We're always somewhat agile, understanding that humans are complex and adaptable organisms. We need to be agile, right? We need to have the ability to assess and monitor how our athletes are responding, how our clients are responding, and make changes if they're not responding how we want them to. So again, don't want to poo-poo the role of isolation, right? We don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater here. Again, isolated drills provide context for both you and your clients, right? So again, wall drill, if I'm just doing a posture hold on the wall, or if I'm just marching, right, preparing to accelerate or preparing to sprint, they provide context for how it feels for your clients, your athletes, and then for you, what your athletes or your clients are capable of, right? I know if someone can't maintain their pillar position, so they can't maintain a neutral pelvis position, a neutral spine position, and disassociate shoulders and hips when they're marching, well, they're going to have a hard time maintaining that neutral, strong posture when they're accelerating and when they're sprinting, right? It can also lay a foundation of understanding, right? So I talked about wanting to keep them coupled, but we can't always keep them coupled, right? If you've never seen a basketball before, it's your first time shooting a basketball, well, I want to limit the stimuli that you're responding to, right? And I want to give you a foundation of understanding so you can start to build somewhat of a weak attractor state to what a quality shot might look like. Understanding that there's no perfect technique, but there are some general guidelines that we're going to be working against. It's good for learning the short term, but negative in the long term. And this is something that the research has shown relatively consistently, is that when we're talking about the short term, right? So in a few months, right, I can get really, really good at shooting a basketball, at throwing a football, right? But one of the best things that makes great athletes is their ability to read and react and make decisions based on their environment. So from a critical thinking standpoint or a creativity standpoint, if I'm only doing isolated drills or mainly doing isolated drills, it can actually stunt athletes or clients' ability to read and react and make decisions based on their environment. So again, good in short term for the skill, but not good in the long term. And then should always be integrated back into the full pattern prior to the end of the session, right? So again, how I structure my acceleration sessions, as an example, right? Yes, we're going to do some wall stuff potentially, but I'm not trying to spend a ton of time there. Yes, we're going to do some partner resisted marching. Maybe we do some resisted acceleration. But in the end of my session, I always want to integrate it back into something that looks like the sport. So whether it's accelerating away from someone or towards someone, again, similar distances, similar constraints. I don't use the ball as an example. I don't always use a ball as an example, but similar constraints to something they would be reacting to in their sport, right? So keeping it coupled to the environment or the tasks in their sport. So the coach's guide to nonlinear pedagogy, right? Some examples that you can take and start to use right now in your own practice as a coach, as a personal trainer, as a physio. So practical application, the ones highlighted, let me just move myself here. The ones highlighted in the yellowish gold, they're going to be the ones we're going to dive into deeper. But I took it from more of a group environment approach, understanding that a lot of us are going to be working with athletes, working with clients in a group environment. So first being understand the principles that underpin technical professional movement, seek to understand each individual's intrinsic dynamics. And I set that up a little bit in the beginning. Some ones that we won't hit on, like size matching equipment. This is one of my favorite ones because it immediately rung home true with me, right? So my start in this industry was with Olympic weightlifting, right? As a athlete and as a coach for recreational Olympic weightlifters. And thinking about a new client coming in and immediately getting them on a 45 or a 20 kilo bar, right? So 45 pound, 20 kilo bar, understanding that might be 50% of their max versus someone who's lifted, for multiple years. They're coming in, 45 pound bar is nothing to them. That is the environment changing, right? And that load is going to change how they move and it's going to impact the learning process. So minimally, can we match equipment size to the person that we're working with? So let's just dive into these. Don't want to spend too much time. But first, understand the principles of technically proficient movement. So again, I teed this up at the beginning, but for any movement, there's no one perfect technique that can be applied to every single person, right? But there are principles of each movement that must be met for it to be technically proficient, right? But our role as a coach is to help people produce the right force in the right direction in the right amount of time, or for the right amount of time to complete the task. And the example I like to use here, super simple, is a barbell back squat, right? And understanding why we're doing it, right? So based on our femur lengths relative to our torso or relative to our tibia, based on the size of our pelvis, the shape of our pelvis, the amount of internal and external rotation we have, the ankle dorsiflexion we have, and so on and so forth, right? There's so many factors, and probably factors we don't even know about, that are going to impact our ability to squat. Right. But understanding why you're squatting and the goal of your squat is going to dictate the technical guardrails that you utilize. Right. So if I'm working with Gen Pop folks and my goal is to squat to get generally stronger, well, I may allow for more of a hip dominant squat. Right. I might allow for some people, hey, you feel really good with more of an upright quad dominant squat or knee dominant squat. Sweet. Right. Super upright torso. A lot of ankle dorsiflexion, knees driving over the toes. That looks good, feels good. Awesome. Another member of my class, you feel great driving the hips back, shins almost vertical. That feels strong and good for you. Cool. Right? Both still lower body pushing patterns. I'm going to let that rock. Right? But if I'm using the squat, let's say I'm working with an athlete or working with a client, I'm using a squat as a means of overloading and strengthening my ability to extend my legs or the leg extensor muscles in a pattern that's similar to how I jump, right? Or similar to how I take off in sports. So let's say I'm working with volleyball or basketball, right? So maybe it is more of an upright takeoff for a lot of the athletes that I'm working with. Well, cool. I'm going to try to drive my athletes into more of an upright squatting position with the hopes that it's going to transfer better to the task of jumping, right? So I have a more specific reason instead of just generally getting strong in a lower body pushing pattern. Now I'm trying to get strong in a lower body pushing pattern with the hopes of it transferring back to a specific sport. So for that reason, now I might not let a hip dominant squat fly, or like more of a low bar back squat, a hingy squat to fly. If they can't organize their center of gravity over their base of support in an upright squat position, maybe I take them to a front squat, right? Maybe I elevate the heels. Maybe I take them to a trap bar deadlift, right? But something that still allows them to squat more upright. Again, because I understand the rationale as to why I'm doing it, right? And that's what sets the movement guardrails for you. Why are you performing these exercises? And then what's the bandwidth in there that you're going to allow as, quote unquote, proficient movement. Understanding that from person to person, yes, it's going to look different, but principally there's things in mind. There's still boxes that I'm trying to check. Now from here, we can start to talk about understanding the individual's intrinsic dynamics, right? So us as the organism, everyone's going to bring different qualities to the table. I like to think about this like a baseball player learning a medicine ball throw versus a regular gen pop, never played a rotational sport, or a new athlete, never played a rotational sport, learning a medicine ball throw, right? So if I've never loaded my hips and then kinetic link from my lower body through my core into my arms into an implement, either swinging a bat, throwing a ball, well, it's going to be harder for me to learn that pattern than if it's a pattern that I've ingrained over and over and over and over and over again, right? So that would be an example of a strong attractor state, right? So I have this strong attractor state that I have ingrained. When I pick up a medicine ball, it's going to be a similar enough pattern that I can start to steal from that attractor state. And that's a good example of our intrinsic dynamics, right? It's what we're bringing to the table, our movement tendencies and things we like to do as movers. But these strong attractor states in this case can have a positive effect, right? I'm a rotational athlete learning how to throw a medicine ball. I can pick it up fast. Or they can have a negative impact on the learning process, right? If you're trying to relearn how to throw, right, but you have a strong attractor state to something that might be inefficient for you, right? Or it's good enough, right? It's satisfying, but it's not the best possible option. Well, it's going to take time and work to break that pattern, right? So understanding maybe our clients' backgrounds, our athletes' backgrounds, their strengths, their weaknesses, their mobility limitations, right? All of this is part of the organism. The better we can understand the organism, the better we can understand what they're bringing to the table and help them throughout the learning process. Again, same idea. If they're more of a weaker athlete, right? They're brand new. Well, I might have to limit the ball size, knowing they might not have the strength to load into the hip, right? Or the strength to maintain that neutral spine position and rotate as they load into the hip, right? So understanding all this allows me to better help or best help the learner. And we talked about this a little bit, but being a hands-off coach, right? And I like to think about this like a gardener, right? So a good gardener, a good florist, they can't make the plants grow. Right? There's nothing I can do to make a plant grow. But what I do is create an environment that supports their growth and development. Same thing as a coach. I can't make you learn something. But what I can do is create an environment that supports the learning process for you as an athlete. Right? So your athletes are getting a ton of information. It's on us to get them to tap into that and use that information. So general guideline, ask more questions, give less statements, or provide less statements, right? Ask why, ask how did it feel, ask what do you think, right? Your athletes or clients are an active part of the learning process. Ask them why and ask them questions. And then create an environment that promotes learning the desired movement patterns through exploration, right? So give them an opportunity to fail, right? Variability is going to be happening all the time. Variability is a natural part of the learning process, right? They're exploring the solution space. They're exploring what they're capable of, and what's right, what's wrong, what feels good, what doesn't, what completes the task successfully, what doesn't. Give them an opportunity to explore that without having to give them feedback every single rep, right? And then from there, try to manipulate the environment to get them to do what you want to do, right? So instead of having to give instruction and feedback every single time, now let's say they can't get the quite forward lean angle of attack and acceleration. They're trying to upright sprint everything. Right. Well, let's create an environment. Maybe it's a weight, right? Maybe it's a harness, a bungee with a partner. Let's create an environment that allows them to make the shape, make the pattern that you want them to make, right? And from there, they can start to learn how that feels like. It could even be changing the start position, right? So if I'm starting from a 2-point, maybe I started from a half kneeling. Maybe I started from a prone position. They're lower. They're naturally going to start to angle out. Maybe I put them on a hill where they can really lean into it, right? Infinite options here for really any skill. It's kind of up to our creativity as coaches, but let's manipulate the environment, right? To give them an opportunity to explore and almost force them into the state that we want them to be moving in. And then finally, again, I hit on this a little bit in the last slide, but change how you view movement variability, right? This is going to be an important aspect of the learning process. And as coaches, we need to understand or try to understand why this variability or variation in movement is happening, right? It could signify a solution to unique constraints. So again, maybe the surface is different. Their footwear is different. They've gotten stronger. They're feeling weaker, right? their movement solution can be based on those unique constraints. It could be someone exploring the solution space, like I talked about last slide. It could be breaking out of an attractor state. So, like I was talking about with a someone learning a new way to throw a football or a new way to swing a bat, right? They already have a deep laid attractor state. Well, there's gonna be a lot of variation when they're trying to get out of that because they're re-finding the solution. And it could just be natural habituation, right? So I'm sure a lot of you have experienced this, but for me as a tennis player, I don't play as often as I'd like. And when I go out and start serving and go out and start hitting forehands and backhands, my first couple reps look terrible. But that's just me getting back in the groove, so to speak, right? So naturally speaking, I need a couple of reps to, okay, wait, I remember how to do this. Okay, I'm getting back. And by the end of the session, I can serve, I can volley, I can hit forehands, backhands, almost like I was when I was at, some of the best in my quote unquote tennis career, right? So variation also can be a good thing for us as coaches, right? So thinking about if you're working with a track athlete versus a lacrosse player, right? So track athlete, I might not want a ton of variation, right? A ton of variability in my acceleration, in my start, knowing that the environment, the constraints aren't going to change too much, right? I'm coming out of the blocks and I'm running in a straight line. And that's about it, right? Versus a lacrosse player, same principles of acceleration. I still have similar angles of attack. I'm still trying to drive back. I'm still trying to horizontally project my center of mass forward. But I'm going to have to do it from a ton of different positions, reacting to a ton of different stimuli. So because of that, I might actually want more variability in my training for a team sport athlete than a track athlete. So they have the ability to solve the unique problems that they're going to experience in their sport, right? Accelerating away from different defenders in an infinite number of positions. So our role as a coach, basically progressing to a more nonlinear approach to coaching that embraces learners' inherent differences, right? Understanding everyone's bringing something different to the table, and they're going to learn at different speeds based on those intrinsic dynamics. We're going to encourage movement exploration. Let them fail. Let them have variability in their movement, right? Let them explore and make them an active participant in the learning process. And then finally, teaches movement in context of how it will be performed in sport or life. So always tying it back to something that looks similar to the demands of their sport, right? Not saying you have to be a sport coach, not saying you have to use the ball, but if you're playing a sport or you're athletes or you're coaching an athlete who plays a team sport and they're reacting to other people, cool. In the drills, have them react to other people other than cones, right? And that will keep it close enough to their sport or close enough to the context they'll be performing in their sport or throughout their life. So if you like this presentation, you want more, you want to talk shop, you want to say what's up, you hit me up. Both my emails here listed, my Instagram at Nashville, and as always, like, comment, and share. And I'll catch you all on the next one. Peace.